The rain came in sideways off the hills that Tuesday, the kind of rain that made Harlow, Kentucky feel like the last town before the edge of the world. It moved through the gaps between buildings, pooled in the ruts along County Route 12, and turned the gravel lot outside Mercer's Auto and Salvage into something that looked more like a riverbed than a place where people brought their broken things to be made whole again. The gutters along the roof edge ran fast and silver, and the awning above the garage bay snapped and shivered in the wind that came off the ridge every time the storm found a new direction to push from. Garrett Mercer had been inside the garage since 7 that morning. Not because he had to be. The shop did not open until 8, and on a Tuesday in late October, with rain like this, most people would call ahead before driving out. But Garrett had learned a long time ago that the hours before anyone else arrived were the only hours that truly belonged to him, and he did not waste them. He had learned to treat those early hours the way a careful man treated a good tool, with attention and without hurry, making the most of what they offered before the day required something else from him. He was working on a 1987 Ford pickup that belonged to a woman named Pauline Voss, a retired school teacher who lived alone on the east side of town and had driven the truck for 31 years through seasons that had not been kind to it. The engine had started misfiring 2 weeks ago, and Pauline had waited until the check engine light came on before calling the shop, which was exactly the kind of patience Garrett respected, and also the kind that cost people more money in the long run. He had told her to bring it in. She had asked what it would cost. He had told her not to worry about that yet, which was the answer he gave when the answer depended on things he had not yet seen. She had shown up the next morning with a covered dish of cornbread as a deposit, and Garrett had accepted it without comment, because some transactions existed outside the language of invoices, and some people deserved to be met in the currency they offered. The garage smelled the way it always did in the morning: motor oil and cold metal, and the faint trace of the pine cleaner he used on the floors every Sunday without fail, because a clean floor told him things a dirty one concealed. The fluorescent lights buzzed steadily overhead, casting everything in the flat white glow that made shadows look permanent and edges look precise. A radio on the shelf above the parts counter played a country station out of Lexington, low enough to think over, loud enough to keep the silence from becoming something else entirely. Wade Calloway came in at 8:15, rain dripping from the brim of his worn cap, 2 gas station coffees in one hand and a paper bag that probably held something neither of them needed, but both of them would eat in the other. Wade was 53, lean and weathered in the specific way of men who had spent their lives outdoors and in motion, with the kind of face that made people underestimate him, right up until the moment they realized their mistake, which was usually the moment it was too late to revise the first impression. He had ridden with Garrett for 11 years, first on long-haul routes across the Southeast, and then on the charity runs that had become the chapter's main purpose after 3 of their oldest members died within the same brutal winter. Wade set one of the coffees on the edge of Pauline's truck bumper without asking if Garrett wanted it, because after 11 years, the question had become unnecessary in the way that certain questions between certain people always eventually did. Ray Pruitt arrived 20 minutes later, boots leaving wet prints across the clean floor, offering no apology for it, because Ray was not a man who apologized for the weather. He was 46, quieter than Wade, with steady hands and the kind of observational patience that made him genuinely useful in situations that required someone to watch carefully without being noticed watching. He was also the best mechanic in the shop, after Garrett himself, a fact Ray neither boasted about nor concealed, because it was simply true, and truth did not require performance. The 3 of them worked through the morning with the easy efficiency of men who had long since stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. The shop moved around them at its own pace. The radio shifted between songs and weather reports, both of which said the same thing in different languages. The afternoon was not going to improve, and the sensible response was to settle in and find a way to be useful where you were. Around 10:30, Garrett straightened up from beneath Pauline's hood and reached for the coffee Wade had brought, which was long cold by then, but still worth drinking because cold coffee was better than none. And Garrett had never been the kind of man who required comfort to function. He looked out through the open bay door at the row of motorcycles parked under the extended awning outside. 6 bikes, including his own, all belonging to members of the charity run who had stopped here on their way through Harlow before continuing south for the weekend fundraiser. The chrome was dulled by the storm, the rain beating and running off surfaces that would shine again when the weather cleared. The engines ticked quietly as they cooled. In weather like this, the bikes looked like sleeping animals waiting for the world to settle down around them. Garrett drank the cold coffee and thought about nothing in particular for a moment, which was something he had taught himself to do over the years with deliberate effort. The ability to let the mind sit empty for 30 seconds without it filling up with old business was a skill the same as any other, and it had taken him the better part of a decade to develop it to the point where it actually worked. He had learned it the same way he had learned most things that mattered, by recognizing that he needed it before he understood how to get it. The old business always came back anyway. That was the nature of old business. It did not respect the discipline he had built or the distance he had put between himself and it. It came back when it chose to, without warning and without an invitation, settling into the available space, the way cold air settled into a room when someone left a door open. It came back now. One moment he was looking at the rain on the gravel lot, watching the puddles shiver under the impact of each new drop, and the next he was standing in his mother's kitchen in Danville 22 years ago, watching his younger sister Grace try to find the right words for something that did not have easy words and never had. Grace had been 24 that year, working the morning shift at a grocery store 2 miles from their mother's house. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and asked after people's families without it feeling like a performance, who brought homemade jam to neighbors who had not asked for it, and remembered to ask about their dogs and their grandchildren and their ongoing disputes with their insurance companies. She was not a person given to anxiety or exaggeration, which was part of why Garrett had not taken her seriously when she first brought the thing up. She had told him about a man who kept appearing near the house, not inside, not close enough to speak to her directly, just near, at the end of the driveway when she left for work in the early morning, on the corner near the bus stop on the days she didn't take the car. Once in the parking lot of the grocery store itself, standing beside a truck she did not recognize, watching her clock in through the front window with an attention that had no innocent explanation. Garrett had been 26 that year, back from 2 years on the road, full of the particular confidence that young men sometimes wore like armor, because they did not yet understand it was made of cardboard and would not hold against anything that actually pushed. He had told Grace that small towns were small, that people cross paths, that she was probably reading too much into it, which was a thing people said when they wanted to be reassuring without having to do anything that reassurance actually required. He had said it with the casual certainty of someone who had never once in his life had to pay close attention to who was standing behind him, because nothing in his experience had taught him that such attention was necessary. Grace had looked at him for a long moment after he said it, not angry, just smaller somehow, in a way that did not involve any change in her posture or her expression, but was entirely visible to him nonetheless. As if his doubt had taken up the space in the room where her certainty had been standing, displacing it the way a heavier thing displaces a lighter one in water. She had nodded and changed the subject, and Garrett had felt the satisfied relief of a man who believed he had handled a difficult conversation well, which was exactly the wrong feeling to have, and which he did not recognize as wrong until much later. In the weeks that followed, Grace changed her route to work without telling anyone she was doing it. Their mother started checking the window locks before bed, a habit she had not had before and never explained. A neighbor 3 houses down eventually called the non-emergency line about a man sitting in a parked car near the school for the third afternoon in a row, and only then did anyone begin to take the pattern seriously. The man had eventually stopped appearing. No one ever fully established why or where he had gone or what he had intended. Garrett had told himself the situation had resolved itself, which was the most convenient interpretation available, and which required him to do nothing and change nothing about how he understood the world. He had apologized to Grace later, more than once. Real apologies, the kind that cost something, that required him to sit with the discomfort of what he had done instead of moving past it. But apologies had a ceiling above which they could not reach. They could account for what had happened and name it accurately and express genuine regret for it. They could not give back the first moment when Grace had needed to be believed, and he had handed her doubt instead, dressed up in the language of reasonableness. They had stayed close for several years after despite everything. Then life had done what life always eventually did to the distances between people who did not tend them with active intention. Garrett's roots had taken him farther from Kentucky. Grace had moved to Tennessee with her husband, a good man named Douglas, who built furniture and coached his daughter's soccer team, and was exactly the kind of steady, patient person Grace deserved to have beside her. Their mother had passed in the winter of Grace's second pregnancy, and neither of them had handled the grief of it well, which meant they had handled it alone when they should have handled it together. Phone calls became less frequent, then became occasional, then became the kind of thing both of them intended on certain evenings, and neither of them completed for reasons that accumulated without ever being named. Not because of anger, not because of that old kitchen moment which had been forgiven in all the ways that things could be forgiven without being entirely resolved. Just because distance was patient and time was generous with its damage, and because Garrett had not known how to begin the conversation that would close the gap without also reopening everything that had made the gap in the first place. The last message he had received from Grace was 3 weeks ago, a text sent at 11 at night from a Tennessee number he still had saved under her name that said only, "I'm doing all right. Just wanted to make sure you knew." He had read it 4 times the night it arrived. He had read it again the next morning. He had not answered it yet, not because he did not want to, but because he did not know what to say. That would be honest and also sufficient. And until he understood how to clear that particular bar, the message stayed in his phone like a stone. He was carrying somewhere in his chest, small and heavy, and present in a way he was constantly aware of, even when he was not actively thinking about it. Wade said something from beneath the hood of a different vehicle, a question about a part number, and Garrett came back to the garage, to the rain, to the cold coffee he was still holding. He set the cup down and returned to Pauline's truck. The work was real and the work was always there, and it asked nothing of him except his attention, which was the most honest transaction he knew. By noon, the rain had not softened. If anything, it had found a more settled purpose, falling without drama and without pause. The kind of rain that did not announce itself or make a statement, but simply continued until the world adjusted its expectations around it. The charity-run riders who had stopped at the shop were mostly inside now, gathered near the parts counter and the old space heater that Garrett kept meaning to replace, and never did because it worked, and because things that worked deserved to keep their place. They talked in the low, easy tones of men who had nowhere urgent to be and had made their peace with that, swapping the kind of conversation that covered everything and committed to nothing, the verbal equivalent of the rain itself. Garrett was near the front of the shop reviewing an invoice at the counter when he heard the sound. Not a cry, not a shout. Something more precise and more alarming than either of those things, because both cries and shouts announced themselves and allowed you to prepare for what came next. This was different. It was the sound of small sneakers slapping across wet concrete in the specific rhythm of a child who had been running for longer than a child should have to run, and who had not yet decided whether the running was going to stop or whether it would simply continue until something external made it stop for her. He looked up from the invoice. She came across the gravel lot from the east, and the first thing he noticed was the backpack. Pink with one strap hanging loose where the clip had come undone, bouncing crookedly against her left shoulder, with each stride in a way that would have been almost funny under any other circumstances. The second thing he noticed was her face. She was 9 years old, maybe on the young edge of 10, with pale brown hair plastered flat against her cheeks by the rain. Strands of it stuck across her forehead and her chin. She was not crying. That was what stopped Garrett cold in a way that a crying child would not have. She was running as fast as her legs would carry her across a rain-soaked parking lot toward a garage full of strangers in worn leather vests, and she was not crying. She had moved past crying somewhere in the last several blocks. What was on her face instead was something older and more serious than tears, something that did not belong on a face that young, the expression of a child who had already done her calculations under pressure and arrived at conclusions that required action rather than the release of emotion. She skidded slightly on the wet concrete at the edge of the awning, caught herself with the automatic balance of someone in motion, and came straight to Garrett without hesitating. Not to Wade, who was closer to the door, not to Ray, who was standing in the open bay entrance with a wrench in his hand. She came to Garrett perhaps because he was the largest and most solid presence in the space. Perhaps because something in the particular stillness of the way he was standing told her that he was not going to step back or redirect her or ask her to explain herself before she was ready. She grabbed the edge of his sleeve with both hands and pulled herself behind him the way a smaller thing moved behind a larger one when the larger one was the only shelter available. Garrett felt the shaking through the fabric of his jacket before he felt the cold of her wet hands, which told him something about how long the shaking had been happening. He did not spin around. He did not raise his voice. He did not do any of the things that instinct suggested and experience had taught him to override, because he understood in the first second that turning a terrified child into the center of a scene was precisely the wrong response to the situation in front of him. He shifted one step to the left, placing his body between the girl and the open lot, and lifted his eyes toward County Route 12 without making the movement obvious. The dark blue pickup truck was at the far edge of the street, idling just past the entrance to the diner across the road. Its headlights burned pale yellow through the rain, twin points of light in the gray afternoon that should not have seemed threatening, and did. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with the slow, patient rhythm of something that had been waiting for a long time and had decided to be comfortable with the waiting. Through the water-streaked glass, a man sat with one hand resting on the wheel. His body turned slightly toward the garage. He was watching the awning, and even across the distance, even through the rain and the distortion of the wet glass, Garrett could see that he was smiling. Not at anyone in particular, just smiling the way a man smiled when he believed he was on the right side of a situation and intended to stay there. Garrett kept his shoulders square and his breathing even, the two things he always managed first when a situation required management. He lowered himself slightly at the knees, just enough so that the girl did not have to look all the way up at him, and kept his voice at the pitch and pace of a conversation between two people who were not in any immediate danger. "What is your name?" he asked without taking his eyes off the truck. "Lily," she said. Her voice was smaller than her running had suggested it would be. "Lily Hartwell." "All right, Lily. My name is Garrett Mercer. You're standing outside my shop and you are not in any trouble here." He felt her hands loosen from his sleeve by one small degree, just enough to tell him that the words had reached her, that she had heard them and chosen to let them mean what he intended. "What happened?" he asked. She swallowed. The rain continued its steady work on the awning above them, each drop hitting the canvas with a sound like a small definitive statement. "A man followed me, in a blue truck. He said my mom sent him to pick me up because she couldn't leave work, but she didn't send him. She would never do that without the password." Garrett kept his eyes on the truck across the road. "What password?" "The word my mom and me picked together for exactly this situation. If someone says she sent them and they don't know the word, I'm not supposed to go anywhere with them." She paused, and in the pause he could hear her making a decision about how much to say. He didn't know the word. He said grown-ups don't need passwords when they're helping. The last sentence moved through Garrett slowly, the way cold water moved through old pipes before the temperature of it fully registered. He recognized the architecture of it immediately, the way a man who had spent his life repairing broken things recognized a component that had been deliberately and skillfully misassembled. It was a sentence designed to sound entirely reasonable while dismantling the one specific protection a child had been given. Not a threat, not a command. Something more careful than either, a tool. To his right, Wade had set his coffee down on the windowsill and was watching the truck across the road with the focused, complete stillness of a man who had trained himself over many years not to act before he fully understood the shape of what he was looking at. "Iron," Wade said quietly, using the road name that only the men from the chapter still used with any regularity. "You want me to go over there and find out what he thinks he's doing?" Garrett raised one hand just slightly, not a sharp gesture and not a command, just enough to hold the space between the intention and the action. "No, nobody goes near him. Nobody moves toward him at all. Wade read the signal immediately and held his position without argument because 11 years had taught him to trust the signal. Garrett turned slightly toward Lily, keeping the truck in his peripheral vision. "Where is your mom right now, Lily?" "At the laundromat on Birch Street. She works the day shift there Monday through Friday." Lily's grip on his sleeve tightened again fractionally. "School let us out early today because a pipe burst near the cafeteria and flooded part of the hallway. We were supposed to wait by the front office for our parents or our emergency contacts. But I thought I could walk. It's only 6 blocks to the laundromat, and I've done it before when she's running late." She said the last part quickly with the specific cadence of a child who was already constructing a defense for a decision she had not yet been accused of making. Garrett recognized that particular rhythm. He had heard it before from people of all ages who had done a reasonable thing and were bracing themselves to be blamed for the outcome. "You made a reasonable choice," he said. "And when something felt wrong, you changed what you were doing. That matters more than the first decision ever will." She looked up at him, then for the first time since she had grabbed his sleeve, a quick assessment that she completed in less than a second before looking back at the ground. "Did he follow you the whole way from school?" Garrett asked. "He started at the corner by the school gate. He pulled up beside me and said he knew my mom and that she had called him from work and asked him to pick me up so she wouldn't have to leave. He said she was in the middle of something and couldn't get away." Lily's voice was steadier than it had any right to be, considering everything. "I crossed to the other sidewalk near the pharmacy on Maple Avenue. I wanted to see if he would turn. He turned." She paused. "Then I ran." "Do you know his name?" Lily nodded slowly, a nod that had thought behind it rather than simple affirmation. "He's been to the laundromat before. More than once. His name is Victor. Victor Shelby. My mom said he used to come in during her shift and try to talk to her. She told him she was busy every time. She told him she wasn't interested. She looked at the wet pavement at her feet. He kept coming back anyway." Garrett absorbed that in silence for a moment, setting it alongside everything else and letting the picture form. Then he stepped inside the door, reached for the shop phone on the counter, and slid it toward the edge where Lily could see it. "Do you know your mom's phone number by heart?" Lily nodded and recited it from memory, each digit careful and deliberate, the way a child recited something they had practiced until they were certain they had it. Garrett dialed. He put it on speaker without asking, because Lily needed to hear her mother's voice, and Donna needed to know her daughter was somewhere with adults who were paying attention. The line rang twice. A woman answered, slightly breathless, the background noise of commercial dryers, and the particular acoustic quality of a large laundromat audible behind her voice. "Donna Hartwell." "Ma'am," Garrett said, keeping his voice level and unhurried. "My name is Garrett Mercer. I run Mercer's Auto and Salvage on County Route 12. Your daughter Lily is here with me. She is safe inside the shop." There was a pause, not long, maybe 3 seconds, possibly 4. But inside those 3 or 4 seconds, Garrett heard something that told him more about this woman's recent life than an hour of conversation could have. It was the pause of someone who had been waiting for a specific phone call, not this one, a different and worse one, and was in the process of determining which kind of call this was. "Is there a blue truck?" Donna said. Garrett's jaw tightened once, a small involuntary movement, and then he released it deliberately. He kept his voice even. "Yes, ma'am, across the road from the shop. The man is still in the vehicle." Donna exhaled. It was a sound that lived in the narrow strip of territory between relief and despair, without fully belonging to either, the sound of someone who had been afraid of a specific thing for a long time and was now dealing with the confirmation that the fear had been warranted all along. "His name is Victor Shelby," she said. "I've reported him to the police twice. He used to come into the laundromat during my shift. He asked for my phone number 3 separate times, and I told him no every time, clearly and directly. Then he started showing up near our apartment building, then near Lily's school. The police said there wasn't enough for them to do anything until he actually did something." Her voice dropped in a way that suggested she was turning slightly away from her coworkers. "I kept telling them that something was coming. They kept telling me they needed something more concrete. Lily had gone completely still in the space beside Garrett. She was listening to her mother's voice come through the speaker with the particular focused attention of a child who is understanding for the first time that the adult world has been carrying a weight that it had been deliberately keeping from her, and who is deciding how she feels about that. Garrett looked at Wade. Wade already had his personal phone out. "Call 911, Garrett said, keeping his voice low enough not to carry outside. "Tell them we have a minor at Mercer's Auto and Salvage on County Road 12. Tell them she was followed on foot by an adult male in a dark blue pickup. Tell them she is inside the building, the doors are locked, and the vehicle is still in the immediate area. Give them the plate number." Ray. Ray Pruitt had moved to the front window without being asked or gestured toward, which was exactly the kind of initiative that made him valuable. He read the plate number from the truck across the road in a calm, deliberate voice, the way someone read a number they needed someone else to write down accurately, and Wade repeated it to the dispatcher word by word. Garrett opened the inner door and held it wide for Lily. "Come inside where it's dry. We've got heat, a working phone line, security cameras, and what I'm told is an unreasonable amount of very bad coffee." The small attempt at levity barely moved her expression, but it gave her something recognizable to step towards, something that belonged to a different category of experience than the one she had been inside for the last 20 minutes. She stepped through the door. Garrett followed and let it close behind them. The garage interior was warm and solidly lit, and smelled of the things it always smelled of. Lily looked around at the parts shelves, the wall clock with its steady second hand, the old radio still murmuring from its shelf above the counter. Everything in the room was ordinary. Everything in the room was exactly what it appeared to be. Garrett had always known that ordinary could function as a kind of medicine when the world outside had stopped making sense. And he watched Lily take in the ordinary details of the space and felt the faintest possible beginning of something settling in her. He pointed to a chair near the office window, positioned so that she could see the entire shop floor and the door simultaneously. "You can sit right there. You can see everything from that chair, and nobody in this room is going to take you anywhere without your mother's voice giving the word." Lily sat. Her sneakers dripped quietly onto the floor mat, leaving two dark, wet impressions that spread slowly outward. She pulled her backpack from her shoulder and held it in her lap with both arms wrapped around it, the way children held the things that belonged to them when everything around them felt uncertain. Donna's voice came through the speaker on the counter which Garrett had left open. "Lily, sweetheart, I'm here. Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Mom." Lily's voice was steadier than the situation had any right to have left it. "I used the password rule. He didn't know it. I didn't get in." There was a sound from Donna, then brief compressed the sound of something very large being held in a very small space, and then she said, "You did exactly right. You did every single thing we practiced. I'm so proud of you." Garrett heard those words and felt them register in a way he had not expected. A mother had prepared her daughter for a specific threat that the official systems around her had declined to take seriously, had given her daughter the only concrete tool available to her in that situation, and the daughter had used that tool correctly under pressure from an adult who was actively trying to argue her out of it. She had used it and run in the right direction and ended up exactly where she needed to be. The least the adults around her could do now was make sure that decision was worth the trust she had placed in it. Victor Shelby stepped out of the truck. He crossed the road at an unhurried pace, both hands visible at his sides. His expression arranged carefully into something that looked like the concern of a person who has been misunderstood and is confident the misunderstanding will be cleared up quickly. He wore a tan work jacket that was clean and pressed dark boots without much wear on the soles, and the studied composure of a man who had walked into difficult situations before and discovered that performed confidence could, in the right circumstances, substitute effectively for innocence. He stopped outside the glass door of the shop and knocked. 2 fingers, light and deliberate and precisely calibrated to sound like a formality being observed rather than an entry being demanded. "Hey there." His voice was muffled by the door but clearly audible. "I think we've got a little bit of a misunderstanding going on. I know this kid's mom. She called me and asked me to help out. Garrett stood inside the door and did not unlock it. He did not step forward or step back. He simply looked at Victor Shelby through the glass with an expression that offered nothing and required nothing, and let the silence do the work that words might have complicated. Victor's smile held for several seconds. Then he adjusted his approach. "I'm not here to cause any trouble at all. I was just doing a favor for somebody I know." He spread his hands slightly, a gesture of complete openness that Garrett recognized immediately as having been used before. "Her mom's stuck at work. I was already in the area. It was just supposed to be a simple thing." Garrett still did not answer. He watched Victor's eyes instead of his hands, because hands did what men decided to do, and eyes showed what they were actually thinking about. There was a moment brief as a single skipped heartbeat when Victor's gaze moved past Garrett's shoulder to the security camera mounted above the parts counter. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible. But Garrett had spent enough years in enough different kinds of difficult situations to know the precise difference between a person who looked past someone to check on a child's welfare and a person who looked past someone to assess what a recording device might have captured. Victor looked at the camera. Lily saw it too. Garrett heard a small shift behind him, the sound of the chair moving slightly, and then Lily's voice, quiet but entirely clear, directed at no one in particular in the way that the most important things were sometimes said. "He's not here because of a mix-up," she said. "He knew which school I go to a long time before today. He knew it before today even started." The room absorbed that sentence without a sound. Wade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ray continued watching from the window, his phone still recording the exterior scene, while keeping Lily carefully out of the frame. The men near the space heater went completely still without being asked, to the way experienced people went still when a situation required it. Donna's voice came through the phone, again lower now, as though she had moved to a more private corner of the laundromat floor. "Lily, I need to tell you something. I've been keeping something back from you because I didn't want you to be frightened, but I think you need to hear it now. Victor Shelby has been doing this for months. Not just recently, since July. I know this because I started writing it down after the second time I reported him and nothing happened. Every time I saw his truck. Every time he appeared somewhere he shouldn't have been. Every time." A pause. "I have all of it written down." Lily looked at the phone on the counter. Her face was still in the careful way of a child processing something that is rearranging the shape of what they thought they understood. "Since July," she said. "Since July," Donna confirmed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." July. Garrett did the math without meaning to and wished he hadn't. 4 months. 4 months of a woman doing the record keeping that the official systems around her had declined to do, because the situation had not yet become sufficiently dramatic for those systems to engage with. 4 months of a child going to school and coming home and eating dinner and doing her homework, while someone her mother had already told to leave them alone, watched the pattern of her days. Outside, Victor had stopped knocking. He stood with his arms folded loosely at his sides, his weight distributed evenly, his posture entirely comfortable in the rain. The posture of a man who had decided that patience was his best available strategy and who was genuinely willing to be patient. He was watching the door the way the rain watched the ground, simply and continuously and without apparent effort. Garrett looked at him through the glass and thought about the nature of that kind of patience and what it meant and where it came from. Then he turned away from the door and went to the counter. He pulled a notepad from beside the register, tore off a clean sheet, and picked up the short pencil stub from the jar next to the stapler. He carried them across the shop to where Lily was sitting and crouched several feet away from her at a distance that gave her the choice of whether to look at him or not. "I want to show you something," he said. "It might help while we wait." She looked at him with the careful attention she had been using for everything since she walked in. He drew 5 short horizontal lines down the page, evenly spaced, numbered simply. 5 questions, he said. That's everything the truth needs to be organized. Who, where, when, what happened, how you felt. He set the pencil down on the edge of the chair beside her within reach. You don't need to find perfect words. Your own words are the right ones. Lily looked at the 5 lines for a moment. Then she picked up the pencil. She wrote slowly and with deliberate pressure, the way children wrote when they wanted the letters to stay exactly where they put them. Garrett did not watch the page. He watched her face instead, and what he saw there was something he had learned to recognize over the years. The specific look of a person for whom a problem has been too large to carry in its whole form, and who has just been handed a way to break it into pieces that could be held and examined one at a time. With each line, she filled in some small fraction of the tension in her expression, reorganized itself into something quieter and more manageable. When she finished the last line, she looked up. "Who?" she said. Her voice was thin but no longer fraying at the edges. "Victor Shelby. He came to the laundromat where my mom works. He tried to start conversations with her when she was working. She told him to stop." She moved her finger to the second line. "Where outside school on Birch Street, then Maple Avenue. I crossed to the other sidewalk near the pharmacy to test if he was really following. He turned that way too. Then I ran and I came here." Third line. "When?" "After early dismissal. The pipe broke near the cafeteria. They sent us home around 11:50. I was going to walk to my mom's workplace because it's 6 blocks and I've made the walk before." She paused there, choosing the next words with care. "What happened?" "He drove slowly behind me. He stopped the truck and said my mom had asked him to pick me up because she was in the middle of something at work. He said he was helping. I asked him for the password that my mom and I have. If someone says my mom sent them, they have to know the word. He didn't know it. He said grown-ups don't need passwords when they're helping someone." She moved to the last line, and her voice when she spoke had a steadiness in it that had not been there when she ran across the parking lot. "How I felt, scared enough to run." Garrett nodded once. "That is the whole story. Everything that matters is on those 5 lines." Outside, Victor knocked again, but this time the sound had a different quality to it when it reached Lily. She heard it and did not look at the door. She looked at Garrett instead. "He's going to say I misunderstood," she said. "You can explain what happened without having to account for what he says you understood," Garrett told her. "Those are two different conversations." The riders who had come in from the charity run had arranged themselves throughout the shop in the way that men with experience arrange themselves when a situation required presence without escalation. Not crowded near the front, not performing readiness, simply occupying the available space in the way solid and stable things occupied space, present and still, and entirely unmoved by the suggestion that they were part of the problem. Earl Duffy had moved to the coffee station and was refilling the carafe slowly, his back to the room, giving Lily the quiet gift of something ordinary happening nearby. A man doing an ordinary thing in an ordinary room. The world continuing its business around the edges of the moment. Earl set a wrapped granola bar on the edge of the counter near Lily's chair, placed it without looking at her, without any gesture toward it, without waiting to see if it was received. He simply put it within reach and returned to what he was doing, the same way you left a door ajar for someone without standing beside it and watching. Lily looked at the granola bar for a moment. Then she reached out and picked it up. She did not open it yet. She just held it. Something moved through Garrett's chest that he did not name because naming it would have required him to look at it directly, and this was not the moment for that. Victor stepped back from the door far enough that his whole body was visible through the glass. He spread both hands out to his sides, palms up, and opened the universal gesture of a man with nothing to conceal and no reason to be suspected of anything. He turned his palms toward the garage and shook his head slowly, a performance of bewildered patience. "I'm going to call Donna myself," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the door. "She'll clear this whole thing up right now." Donna's voice came through the speakerphone before anyone else could respond, and the quality of her voice had changed from the careful, measured tone she had been using. What replaced it was something quieter and more final, like a door being closed on a specific argument. "I am on the phone. Right now. I have been on the phone. And I did not ask Victor Shelby to pick up my daughter. I have never asked him to do anything for me or my family. What I have done is ask him on 3 separate occasions to stop coming to my workplace, and he has not done that." The shop went entirely still. Victor outside the glass could not have heard her. He already had his own phone raised to his ear, completing the performance of placing the call. But everyone inside the shop heard every word, and the sentence moved through the room the way a key moved through a lock, not with force, but with precise mechanical finality. Lily set the granola bar down on the arm of the chair. She looked at the speakerphone on the counter. He told me she needed help, she said, not to anyone in particular. Simply aloud, placing the statement next to Donna's and letting the distance between them be visible to anyone in the room who cared to look. I know, baby, Donna said. He sounded like everything he was saying was true. I know, that's the hardest part to explain. Donna's voice was steady in the way of someone who is holding a great deal of weight at a level below where it would show. It's also exactly why we made the password, because a person can sound like they're telling the truth and still not be telling it. The password isn't about whether someone sounds right. It's about whether they know the one specific thing that only the right person would know. Lily looked at the phone for a long moment. Then she nodded a small private nod, the kind that was not for anyone else's benefit. Garrett moved back toward the door. Outside, Victor had lowered his phone. He had not reached Donna, she was already on the line, and the performance of calling her had produced nothing useful. His expression shifted again, and what replaced the wounded neighbor look was something he probably believed read as principled indignation. He stepped closer to the door. You're going to take a bunch of bikers' word over mine. His voice had an edge in it now that the polite versions had not carried. You don't know anything about this family. You don't know anything about this situation. Garrett looked at him through the glass and felt nothing that resembled anger. Anger was imprecise, and this moment required precision. What he felt instead was a kind of clarity, the specific variety that arrived when you had been uncertain about the shape of a thing for a long time, and then the shape resolved itself completely, and you understood that the uncertainty was over. Then wait for the officer, Garrett said, and explain it to her. Victor's mouth opened, but before he could find the next version of his answer, the blue and white light of a patrol car moved across the wet face of the diner across the road, and the sound of tires on rain-soaked gravel filled the lot. Officer Dana Kellum stepped out of the cruiser the way she did most things without announcement and without any wasted motion. She was 41 years old with dark hair pulled back under a rain-dampened cap, and she moved across the parking lot with the deliberate, measured pace of someone who had been in enough situations to know that the first 10 seconds of her arrival determined the shape of everything that came after them. She kept her hands loose and visible. Her first words went to Victor. Sir, stay right where you are, please. Victor turned toward her with the expression already assembled. Officer, thank you for coming out. There's been a misunderstanding here. I know this family. The little girl's mother works in the same area as me, and she called and asked me to pick her daughter up because of the early dismissal situation at the school. Officer Kellum nodded, not in agreement. In acknowledgement, which was an entirely different thing, and which Victor did not appear to notice the difference between. She looked past him through the glass door of the shop and located Garrett's position immediately. Then she found Lily. She did not wave. She did not gesture or call out or ask Lily to come to the door or do anything that would require the child to move toward the man who had frightened her. She simply looked at Lily directly and long enough for Lily to know she was being looked at, and then she nodded once. Slow and deliberate and unambiguous, one adult to another across the distance over the head of the man standing between them. Lily inside let out a breath that had clearly been waiting some time for permission to leave her. Officer Kellum looked at the security camera above the entrance, then at Ray's position near the window, then at the geometry of the lot in the position of Victor's truck. She was building the picture before she asked anyone a single question, which was the right sequence. She turned back to Victor. How did you know the school had an early dismissal today? A pause, just brief enough to be noticeable to someone looking for it. Donna told me. She called me from work this morning. What time was that call? Another pause, slightly longer. Around 11, maybe 11:30, somewhere in there. Officer Kellum wrote in her notebook without commenting on the answer. Inside the shop, Ray had not stopped working. He had pulled the footage from the garage's northeast camera up on the monitor behind the parts counter, moving quietly and without drawing attention to what he was doing until he had something worth showing. He called Garrett over with a word. Garrett walked to the screen and looked at it. The northeast camera had an angle that caught the edge of County Route 12 through the gap between the awning and the wall, clear enough to show the front portion of the diner's parking area across the road. And there in the corner of the frame at 11:45 in the morning, the dark blue pickup truck was already parked, already waiting, engine presumably running. The timestamp in the corner was precise and unambiguous and showed no signs of having been adjusted. 16 minutes before the school district had sent out the automated notification about the burst pipe and the early dismissal. 23 minutes before Donna Hartwell had received any communication from the school about her daughter's schedule changing. Victor Shelby had been parked across the road from Mercer's Auto and Salvage, positioned with a sight line toward the direction a child walking from that school would approach from before anyone whose child attended that school had been told the school was closing early. Ray pointed at the timestamp with one finger. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Garrett looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at Lily across the shop. She was watching his face, reading the situation from his expression, the way children who had learned to be careful read rooms from the adults in them rather than from the events themselves. "Ray," he said, "print that frame for Officer Kellum." Ray was already at the printer. Garrett went back to his position near the door. Wade was updating the dispatcher with the new information, the timestamp, the position of the vehicle, the discrepancy between what Victor had claimed and what the recording showed. The dispatcher noted each detail. The record was building itself one accurate piece at a time, which was the only way a record of any worth was ever built. Outside, Officer Kellum continued her conversation with Victor. He was still adjusting the story, still shaving small inconsistencies into new explanations, adding details that arrived in the cadence of genuine memory rather than the cadence of construction. He was skilled at it. He had the voice and the patience and the practiced composure of someone who had done exactly this before and understood that the goal was not to convince everyone, but to introduce enough uncertainty that the most immediate consequences became avoidable. Then the door of the diner across the road opened. Mrs. Faye Tatum came out in a yellow rain slicker, buttoned to her chin, and the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was not interested in revisiting it. She was 63, had owned the diner for 19 years, and knew every vehicle that regularly parked in her lot, and most that didn't. She crossed the road carrying a manila envelope with both hands and stopped beside Officer Kellum without preamble or apology for the interruption. "I have footage from my exterior camera," she said. She opened the envelope and produced a series of printed stills. "That truck was in my lot this morning. I wrote the times on the back of each one because my daughter has been after me to document things, and today I'm very glad she has." Officer Kellum took the envelope. She examined the first still, then the second. Then she looked up at Victor with an expression that had completed its assessment and was no longer accepting new information into the open question of what it was assessing. The diner camera had caught the truck at 11:42, 3 minutes before even the garage camera had recorded it. Victor Shelby sitting inside his vehicle with the engine running, his body angled toward the direction of the school, the rain just beginning to come down around him. Present and positioned and waiting before the school had sent a single notification to a single parent. Victor's posture changed. Not dramatically, nothing collapsed or fell away, but something shifted in the way his weight was distributed, as though a calculation had been revised, and the new number was not comfortable to stand on. Inside the shop, the dispatcher logged the update. A second patrol car was 12 minutes out. Wade relayed this to Garrett in a tone that didn't carry, and Garrett acknowledged it with a movement too small to be called a nod. Lily had not been watching the window. She had been watching Garrett's face. When he crossed the shop and crouched a few feet from her chair, she looked at him with the direct assessing attention she had been using since she arrived. "How are you doing?" he asked. She considered the question with the seriousness that it deserved, as though she believed he was actually asking and not simply performing the asking. "Better than I was outside," she said, "but my hands are still shaking a little." "That's your body finishing what the running started," he said. "It takes a few minutes to catch up to the fact that you stopped." She looked at her hands as though she found this information genuinely useful. Will I have to go outside to talk to the police officer? No, the officer will come in here when she's ready. You'll tell your story in this room with your mom beside you. He doesn't get to be in the same room when you do it. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he told me that kids don't always understand what adults are doing when they're trying to help. He said I would feel bad later for not getting in. He said I was making everything harder than it had to be. The sentence moved through Garrett with the specific cold precision of something engineered to find a particular kind of target. He recognized it now that he was hearing it repeated in Lily's careful voice, the way it had been constructed to sound like wisdom, while functioning as a lever placed exactly at the point where a 9-year-old's confidence met her doubt, designed to use the weight of one against the other. You are not going to feel bad, he said. What you're going to feel eventually is that you trusted the right thing at the right moment. Your body told you something was wrong. You listened to it. You made it to a safe place, and you got help. He looked at her steadily. That is not something you will feel bad about. That is something you will remember differently than you think you will right now. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the notepad in her hands, running her thumb along the edge of the paper where the 5 lines were still filled in with her own careful writing. Outside, Victor had shifted tactics again. His hands were up and moving in the small, quick, circular gestures of a man whose words were no longer quite holding the shape he needed them to hold. He was talking about the neighborhood, about the school, about the kind of thing that happened when school let out early and coordination broke down, and well-meaning people got caught in the middle of something that had been blown entirely out of proportion. He used the word strangers twice, and both times his eyes moved briefly toward the shop windows, the implication clear. The men in the shop did not move. They did not stir or respond or give any indication that they had heard. They stood in their various positions, the way the motorcycle stood under the awning outside, simply and solidly occupying the space they were in, present and immovable, and entirely unbothered by the suggestion that their presence was the problem rather than part of the solution. Donna's voice came through the speakerphone again, closer now, the sound of an engine audible in the background. Lily, I am 3 minutes away. My supervisor is driving. I'm almost there. Okay, Mom. Lily's voice carried something in it now that had not been there when she arrived. Something that was not quite calm, but was in the same general direction as calm, moving toward it by degrees. You remembered everything, every single part of it. I know, Lily said, and then quietly in a voice that was not performing anything for anyone's benefit, but was simply stating a fact about itself. I was really scared the whole time, Mom. I was scared the whole time I was running, but I knew what I was supposed to do. Outside, the second patrol car turned into the lot from County Route 12. Officer Kellum glanced at it once, then back at Victor. The story Victor had been telling had been running up against the available evidence for long enough now that the two things were no longer touching at any point. The timestamp from the garage camera, the earlier timestamp from the diner, Mrs. Tatum standing 3 feet away with a manila envelope. A mother who had been on speakerphone since before Officer Kellum arrived. Victor looked at the second cruiser, then at the cameras, then at the door of the shop where Garrett was standing. His expression, which had been performing a sequence of carefully considered things since he stepped out of his truck, finally ran out of its next version. What showed through was not the expression of a man who had been wrongly suspected. It was the expression of a man who had been counting on specific conditions and was discovering that most of those conditions no longer existed. He took 2 deliberate steps toward his truck. Mr. Shelby. Officer Kellum's voice did not rise. It did not change register or add force. It simply became something that occupied the available space completely and left no room for anything else to happen inside it. We are not finished here. The officer from the second cruiser moved to the front of the pickup truck without hurrying and without drama, simply placing himself in the geometry of the situation in a way that changed what was possible within it. Victor stopped. His hand was close to the door handle, but not on it. He stood there in the rain in his clean jacket, in his unworn boots, and the distance between what the afternoon had been intended to be and what it had become was visible in the particular stillness of his shoulders, in the way a man went still when the thing he had been most counting on was no longer available to him. Lily watched through the glass. "Is he going to leave?" she asked. Garrett looked at the scene outside, at the two patrol cars, at Officer Kellum's notebook still open and her pen still moving, at Victor's hand which had dropped back to his side. "No," he said. "He is not going anywhere." A gray sedan pulled into the lot at speed, and before it had fully stopped, the passenger door opened and Donna Hartwell was already stepping out. She was wearing a blue laundromat apron over a gray sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back and coming loose at the edges from the hours of work before this, and she moved across the gravel lot with the specific and complete focus of someone for whom the entire world had narrowed to a single point on the other side of a glass door. She did not look at Victor Shelby, not once, not for a fraction of a second. She moved past him the way water moved past an obstacle, finding the available path without acknowledging the obstacle's existence. She reached Officer Kellum and stopped and spoke two sentences to her. And in those two sentences, and in the way her body was positioned as she spoke them, everything about who she was and what she had been doing for the past 4 months was entirely visible to anyone paying attention. Not a woman who had been wrong and was now being proven right. A woman who had been right and was finally at last being heard. Officer Kellum looked at the shop door. She found Garrett's face through the glass. She nodded. Garrett put his hand on the lock and turned it. The door opened, and the sound and the cold and the smell of the rain came into the garage for the first time since he had locked it behind Lily. And Donna Hartwell came through the door with rain on her shoulders and her eyes already finding the chair near the office window before the door had fully swung open. Lily stood up. The chair legs scraped the floor and the granola bar fell from the arm of the chair, and neither of them noticed. Lily stood up and looked at her mother, and her mother looked at her, and neither of them said anything in the first moment, because there are moments that arrive so full of what has happened inside them that words would simply displace what is already there, and entering them with language would be a loss rather than a gain. Then Donna crossed the remaining distance, and she did not rush the last step. Not quite, but opened her arms while she was still moving and waited for Lily to come the rest of the way. And Lily did, and folded into her completely, and the sound Donna made when her daughter reached her was one of those sounds that belongs entirely to the private architecture of a specific relationship and has no translation into any language that exists outside it. Garrett turned toward the window and looked at the rain on the gravel lot and gave them what he could of the room. Behind him, without anyone asking, Earl Duffy set a second chair beside the first. Wade ended the call with the dispatcher. Ray lowered his phone and stood quietly near the window. Outside in the gray October rain, Victor Shelby stood between two patrol cars with nowhere left to go, and the silence around him was the loudest thing in Harlow, Kentucky that afternoon. For a few minutes after Donna came through the door, nobody in the garage spoke, and nobody needed to. The rain continued outside with the same patient indifference it had maintained all day. Inside, the only sounds were the faint tick of the wall clock above the parts counter, the low hum of the space heater in the corner, and the quiet, unsteady rhythm of Donna's breathing as it gradually settled into something more like its normal shape. The room held all of it. That was what rooms were for. Sometimes not shelter from the weather, but shelter from something less definable. And Garrett's garage had been built solidly enough to hold whatever was put into it. Officer Dana Kellum came through the door 10 minutes later and closed it behind her without looking back at the parking lot. She had a small digital recorder in one hand and the particular quality of patience in her face that Garrett had recognized immediately when she stepped out of the cruiser, the patience of someone who understood that her job in the next hour was to create the conditions for truth to be stated clearly, not to perform authority or demonstrate thoroughness. Those things would take care of themselves if the conditions were right. She did not stand in the center of the room. She moved the chair Earl had positioned and placed it at the corner of the small office space, angling it so that she and Lily would be at the same level with no desk between them, and she set the recorder on the edge of the desk where everyone in the room could see it clearly. "Lily," she said, "I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened today. Your mom can stay right beside you. Mr. Mercer can stay near the door if that's helpful. But no one is going to tell you what to say, and no one needs you to have perfect words. What you remember is what matters here. Lily looked at Garrett, then at Donna, then at the recorder on the desk. She reached into her lap and retrieved the notepad, the one with the 5 lines she had filled in herself in her own careful pressing handwriting, and set it on the desk beside the recorder, the way you set a document on a table when you had prepared it in advance and were ready to work from it. "Can I use this?" she asked. Officer Kellum looked at the notepad. Something moved briefly in her expression that was not quite a smile but was in the near vicinity of one. "Absolutely," she said. Donna sat close enough to Lily that their shoulders were touching, but she kept her hands folded in her own lap and her eyes on her daughter's face. She had clearly decided before she came through the door what her role in this room was going to be, and she was holding to it with the focused discipline of a person who understood that the most important thing she could do right now was not speak. Lily placed one finger on the first line of the notepad. "Who?" she said. Her voice was thin in the way of something that had been through a great deal recently, but it was not unsteady. "Victor Shelby. He came into the laundromat where my mom works. He tried to talk to her while she was working. She told him to stop." She moved her finger to the second line. "Where?" "He started following me outside school on Birch Street, then on Maple Avenue. I crossed to the other sidewalk near the pharmacy to see if he was really following me. He turned too. Then I ran and I came here." Third line. "When?" "After early dismissal. The pipe broke near the cafeteria. They sent us home around 11:50. I was going to walk to my mom's workplace because it's 6 blocks, and I've done the walk before when she's running behind." She paused, choosing the next words with the particular care of someone who wants to be accurate rather than impressive. "What happened?" "He drove slowly behind me after I left the school. He stopped the truck and said my mom had called him from work and asked him to pick me up because she was in the middle of something and couldn't leave. He said he was doing her a favor. I asked him for the password. My mom and I have a word that we chose together. If someone says my mom sent them, they have to tell me the word or I don't go with them." He didn't know the word. He said that grown-ups don't need passwords when they're trying to help someone. She moved her finger to the last line, and when she spoke again, her voice had a quality that had not been in it when she sat down. Not confidence exactly, but something in the same direction. "How I felt. Scared enough to run." The office was quiet for a long moment. The rain touched the window. The clock on the wall measured out its small, steady increments of time, indifferent to what the time was being spent on. Officer Kellum had not written during Lily's account. She had listened, and her pen had stayed still, and now she wrote. That was the right order for the situation, and Lily seemed to have noticed it, because by the time she reached the last line, her voice had a quality it had not had when she started. "You said he knew which school you went to," Officer Kellum said. "How do you know that?" "He said the name of my school when he was talking to me on the sidewalk. I hadn't told him which school I went to, and my mom never told him." Lily looked at Donna. "Mom, I never told him anything about Lily's school or her schedule." Donna said, "I barely spoke to him at all. I told him I was busy every single time he came in." Officer Kellum wrote that down. "Lily, did he say anything else before you ran? Anything you haven't mentioned yet?" Lily's jaw tightened by one small degree. "He said I would feel bad later for not getting in. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be." A pause. "He said kids don't always understand what adults are doing when they're trying to help." The room absorbed that sentence in the particular silence of people who recognize a specific kind of thing when they hear it named. Wade, near the far wall, looked at the floor. Ray stood still at the window. Earl had stopped moving completely near the coffee station. The sentence had a precise and deliberate architecture to it, and everyone in the room who was old enough to have seen that architecture before understood immediately what it had been designed to do to a 9-year-old girl standing alone on a sidewalk in the rain. Garrett looked at Lily and waited until she looked back at him. "You understood exactly what was happening," he said. It was not a question. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "I did." Officer Kellum looked at Lily directly, with the kind of directness that had no performance in it anywhere. "You did everything right. Every single step from the moment something felt wrong. You used the password. You changed direction to test whether you were being followed. You went to a public place with other adults present. You asked for help and you stayed where it was safe. She let that sit for a moment. Most adults I know would be proud to have made that many correct decisions in a row under that kind of pressure. Lily looked at the notepad. Something shifted in her face the way ice shifted in the first days of spring. Not breaking, simply beginning to loosen from the shape it had been holding through the cold. Not all the way gone, just beginning. Donna's hand moved to cover Lily's on the desk. It stayed there. Outside, through the rain-streaked glass of the office window, Garrett could see Officer Kellum's partner speaking with Victor near the second patrol car. Victor's hands were moving again, the same small circling gestures he had used at the door, still building explanations out of the available air. But the audience for those explanations had changed character entirely. The person writing things down now was doing so with the same measured, thorough efficiency that Officer Kellum had used inside the shop, and the distance between what Victor needed his story to be and what the documented evidence showed it was had been closing since the moment Mrs. Faye Tatum crossed the road in her yellow rain slicker. Garrett thought about confidence, the performed kind, the kind that substituted for substance when substance was unavailable. He had known men who could walk into a room and shift the shape of everyone's understanding simply through the quality of their certainty. He had been impressed by that quality when he was young enough to confuse it with authority. What he understood now at 48 years old, standing in a garage he had built himself over 17 years, on this particular piece of Kentucky ground, was that confidence without substance was not a strength. It was a delay. It bought time. It could not purchase outcomes. Victor's time in the rain was running out, and everyone who looked at him could see it running out, and that was the only satisfaction Garrett permitted himself from the situation. Not triumph, not the particular pleasure of having been on the right side of something. Just the quiet, durable fact of having been the right kind of person in a moment that required a specific kind of person and having held that position without moving. Ray came quietly to his side. Kellum's partner wants everything from the camera system, including the timestamp frame from this morning. Give them all of it, Garrett said. Everything we have. Ray nodded and went to the monitor. Officer Kellum came out of the office and crossed the shop floor to where Garrett was standing near the window. Behind her, Donna had shifted her chair closer to Lily's and was speaking to her quietly. Lily's dark green backpack now sitting properly on her lap, where her pink one had been when she arrived, both straps on. I'll need formal statements from you and your men, Officer Kellum said. The camera footage is going to be significant in how this moves forward. Whatever you need. She looked toward the window. He's going to characterize this as a misunderstanding that escalated. He's going to say the truck being there early was coincidental. He happened to be in the area. The diner footage shows him there 3 minutes before the garage camera picked him up. Both timestamps are before the school notification went out. I know, she said. That's significant documentation, but I want to be straightforward with you about how these cases proceed. It takes time. The system has a specific pace. Garrett looked at her. Mrs. Hartwell filed 2 previous reports. I know that too. Officer Kellum was quiet for a moment. Those reports are part of the record. Everything that has happened today is part of the record. That record doesn't disappear. She looked toward where Donna and Lily were sitting. It matters, even when it doesn't feel like it's moving fast enough to matter. What matters to me right now, Garrett said, is that Lily doesn't go out that door until her mother is beside her and she's ready. She won't, Officer Kellum said. You have my word on that. She went back outside. Garrett watched through the window as she walked to her partner, reviewed the printed camera frame Ray had given her, and then looked at Victor with the expression of someone who has finished gathering information and has moved into a different phase of what they are doing. Victor saw it in her face. Whatever the current version of his story was, he stopped telling it. The second patrol car's radio produced a short burst of sound. The officer near it listened, wrote something, exchanged a look with Officer Kellum. The look was brief and specific and complete. Inside, Lily had left the office chair and was sitting beside Donna on the bench along the wall near the parts counter. Their shoulders together, Lily's head tilted at a slight angle toward her mother's arm. She was not asleep. Her eyes were open, and she was looking at the back of the shop with the particular distant attention of someone whose body has finally received permission to stop the thing it has been doing and is now in the process of understanding what that permission means. She had held together through all of it. She had held together from the moment she decided to run until this moment, and the holding had cost her something, and she was now quietly and without drama allowing herself to put the cost down somewhere and not carry it anymore. Earl Duffy brought a fresh cup of coffee for Donna without being asked and set it on the bench beside her. Donna accepted it with a nod that carried more weight than most people invested in complete sentences. Wade had ended the call with the dispatcher and was standing quietly near the parts counter, not doing anything particular, simply being in the room in the way the room needed someone to be in it. Ray was organizing the camera footage onto a drive for the department. Garrett pulled a chair from the office and set it near the bench, not too close, and sat down. "You did something hard today," he said to Lily. "Not just the running, the talking afterward, telling it in the right order when every part of you probably wanted to either shut down completely or let all of it out at once." Lily considered this with the seriousness she had applied to everything since she arrived. "I kept being afraid I would say it wrong." "You didn't. I said around noon, but it was actually closer to 11:50. I wasn't sure of the exact time." "Around noon is accurate. Accuracy and exactness are two different things, and the officer understands that better than most people." Lily looked at her hands. "What's going to happen to him?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. He believed in honest answers to honest questions, especially the ones that were difficult to answer honestly. "I don't know the exact shape of what comes next," he said. "That part moves through processes that are outside this room and takes longer than today. What I know is that everything you said and everything the cameras recorded and everything your mom prepared and saved over the last 4 months, all of it is now part of an official record that doesn't go away. That record has your words in it, your exact words in your own voice." Lily was quiet. She looked at the notepad still on the desk in the office, visible through the open door. Then she said something that moved through the room the way a stone moved through still water, sending ripples to every edge. "I want people to know," she said, "that when kids say someone is scaring them, they might not have all the right words yet, but that doesn't mean they're wrong about what they're feeling." No one spoke. Garrett felt the sentence reach him in a place below the level of conscious thought, the place where things landed when they were true, in a way that needed no argument and admitted no qualification of any kind. He thought of Grace in their mother's kitchen with her hands around a coffee mug, trying to find the words for something that had no easy words. He thought of the way her face had gone smaller when his doubt occupied the space her certainty had been standing in. He thought of the message on his phone, 3 weeks old, now sitting unanswered in the dark of his vest pocket. He did not say any of that. This moment was Lily's in the room she had earned the right to speak in, and he held what she had said and let it be exactly what it was. Officer Kellum came back through the door. She looked at the window, then at Garrett, then at Donna and Lily on the bench. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "I need to tell you something. Victor Shelby has a prior record in Ohio, violation of a protective order filed 3 years ago in Columbus." She paused to let that sit. "That information is now part of this case." Donna's jaw tightened a single controlled movement. She breathed in slowly and breathed out. "I reported him twice," she said. "I told them he wasn't stopping. I told them specifically that he had been near our apartment and near Lily's school. Both times I was told there wasn't enough." "I know," Officer Kellum said. "Those reports are part of the record. Both of them." After the second time, Donna said, "I decided I needed to start building my own record." She reached into the pocket of her laundromat apron. "I have a notebook at home. Dates, times, exact locations, what he said in each instance." She held out her phone. "And I have this. I recorded him. Twice at the laundromat. I did it because The second time the police said they couldn't help, I understood that I was going to have to document this myself if it was ever going to be documented at all. She looked at Officer Kellum steadily. In the recordings, he mentions Lily's school by name. He says what time she gets out. Both recordings. The silence in the room had a different quality than the silences that had come before it. This one had a direction to it, moving towards something being completed and accounted for. Officer Kellum took the phone with both hands. These will need to be transferred to evidence properly. Take whatever you need, Donna said. Take all of it. Lily was looking at her mother with an expression that was absorbing something new about who her mother was. Not just who she was in the ordinary course of days, but what she had been doing in the months that Lily had not known to be paying attention to. You already knew, Lily said. You knew how dangerous he was before today. I knew enough, Donna said. I didn't know how to make the people who could do something about it understand what I knew. But I kept collecting the evidence anyway because I thought eventually there would be enough. She looked at her daughter steadily. And I made the password with you because I needed you to have something I could give you right now today, in case today came before the evidence was enough. Lily leaned into her mother's side and did not say anything for a long moment. Outside, Victor Shelby was guided toward the second patrol car. He did not resist in any way that would have made the situation dramatic, and he did not go easily in any way that made it appear cooperative. And the narrow territory between those two things was where he stayed while the officer managed the transition. He looked once at the shop window as he was moved, and Garrett was standing in the frame of it when he did. Garrett did not step back. He did not look away. He stood in the same position he had held for the past hour and a half, unmoved and unhurried, a man with no intention of being somewhere else. Victor looked away first. The patrol car door closed. Ray let out a quiet breath beside the window. Wade uncrossed his arms. Earl poured himself a cup of coffee and drank it standing, looking at nothing particular, the look of a man whose portion of a thing that needed doing had been done. The rain had shifted during the hour. The hard drumming on the awning had changed to something softer, a fine gray mist that hung in the air and made the parking lot look like a photograph taken at a distance. All silver light and softened edges, and the kind of quiet that followed when something that had been held under sustained tension was finally allowed to release. Donna held Lily against her side and pressed a long, deliberate kiss into her daughter's hair. Lily's eyes were half closed, her hands finally still in her lap, the shaking gone now. The tension that had been visible in her small shoulders since she ran across the gravel lot had given way to the specific exhaustion that came not from the physical effort of running, but from the sustained effort of keeping yourself together when every external circumstance was asking you not to. She had kept herself together, through all of it, completely. And now, in the warmth of the garage, with her mother's arm around her, she was allowing herself to be done. After a while, Officer Kellum came back in with the paperwork that procedurally followed situations like this one, and the next hour moved through its necessary stages. Donna went through the documentation methodically, the notebook at home, the dates and times and specific words recorded in it, the 2 audio files on her phone, the pattern of Victor's appearances across the last 4 months, the 2 previous reports filed, and the responses received. She presented it all with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her head many times and was finally in the room where it could actually happen. Garrett answered his own questions when they came to him. The camera system and its coverage angles, the timestamps on the footage, what he had observed from the moment Lily's sneakers sounded on the wet concrete until Officer Kellum stepped out of her cruiser. He gave it in the order it had actually occurred, without additions and without omissions, because that was the only way a true account was ever useful. Wade gave his account of the 911 call in the dispatcher record. Ray covered the camera footage retrieval in the Ohio connection he had found and passed along. Earl described what he had observed from the coffee station briefly and accurately, like a man who understood that the quality of a statement was in its precision rather than its length. Before Officer Kellum left, she stopped by the bench where Lily was sitting. I want to say something to you directly, she said. What you did today, every choice you made from the moment something felt wrong, was exactly right. You used the password your mom gave you. You tested whether you were being followed by crossing the street. You found a public place with other adults, and you asked for help, and you stayed put. You kept your head when an adult was actively trying to confuse you. She paused. And the password, what your mom built with you. I'm going to tell every parent I talk to about that one thing. Lily looked up at her. Does it always work? Officer Kellum considered this with genuine seriousness. It worked today because you believed in it and because you held on to it when he tried to argue you out of it. The word is only as strong as the person who refuses to let go of it. Lily held that answer for a moment. Then she nodded the slow nod of someone adding something to a collection of things they intend to keep. After Officer Kellum left the garage, began its quiet return to itself. Wade called the charity run organizer to explain the delay. The organizer, who had learned the outline of the story through the chapter's group message thread, said to take all the time necessary and they would regroup in the morning. Ray put the camera footage on a drive for the department and labeled it carefully. Earl washed the coffee cups with the thoroughness of a man who found satisfaction in returning things to their proper state. Garrett went outside and stood alone under the awning for a few minutes. The second patrol car was gone. Victor Shelby was gone. The dark blue truck remained at the edge of the diner lot, ordinary, and still the way things that had been dangerous looked when they had lost their capacity to move on their own. It would be towed within the hour. He thought about Donna writing in her notebook for 4 months because the system that was supposed to observe and document had declined to observe and document. He thought about Lily carrying a password through 6 blocks of a situation designed to take it from her and refusing to let it go even when an adult told her it wasn't necessary. He thought about what it meant that a 9-year-old girl and her mother had been more prepared for that afternoon than the official structures built to protect them. He thought about Grace. He pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his vest and looked at the message. 3 weeks old. I'm doing all right. Just wanted to make sure you knew. He had spent 3 weeks trying to construct a response that would carry the appropriate weight for everything it needed to acknowledge. He had been looking for a sentence that could account for 22 years of distance and one specific moment in their mother's kitchen that could do all of that work without asking Grace to sit under the full weight of it at once. He understood now, trying to make forgiveness something he could engineer through the right arrangement of words. But forgiveness was not something that could be engineered. It could only be offered. The same way a door could only be opened. The rest of it, what happened after the door opened, that belonged to something beyond the mechanics of the gesture. He typed 4 words. I believe you, Grace. He looked at them for a moment before sending, not because he was uncertain, but because they were the truest thing he had to offer, and he wanted to feel the full weight of them before he released them. They were the words he should have said in their mother's kitchen when Grace was 24, and standing in the fluorescent light with her hands around a coffee mug and all the certainty in her face that she had earned by paying attention to what her own body was telling her. And he had handed her his doubt in its place. He sent them. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went inside. Lily was standing at the counter. She had the notepad in her hand and was looking at the front of it, the side with the 5 lines, with the expression of someone who had used something for its intended purpose and was deciding what it was now that the purpose had been served. She heard Garrett come through the door and looked up. She turned the notepad over. On the back, in the same careful, hard-pressed letters she had used for the 5 lines on the front, she had written 5 words that took up half the page. Thank you for believing me. She held it out to him with both hands. Garrett took it from her. He looked at it for a long moment, and what moved through him in that moment was not any of the things that people displayed when they wanted to be seen doing something significant. It was quieter than any of those things and older than any of them. It was the feeling of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a long time, not always consciously, not always heavily, but continuously, and who had not known he was still carrying it until something small and precisely true had arrived and shifted it. Not removed it. Some weights did not leave entirely, and this one would not, but shifted, redistributed, changed in position just enough that breathing came more easily than it had an hour ago. He folded the notepad once and placed it inside the breast pocket of his vest where it rested against him. Thank you for telling the truth, he said. Lily looked at the door. Can we go now? She asked Donna. Whenever you're ready, Donna said. They moved toward the door together, Donna's hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. Garrett held the door open and they walked through it into the gray October afternoon, across the gravel lot where the rain had softened to almost nothing, and the tire tracks from the patrol cars were already filling with water and beginning to smooth themselves over the way surfaces recovered when the things that had marked them were gone. At the far edge of the lot, Lily turned around. She looked at Garrett in the doorway and at the men standing in the warm light behind him, and she raised her hand. Small and pale in the gray afternoon light, a gesture from a person who had exhausted the available words and was using the one thing left that still carried meaning without them. Garrett raised his hand in return. He stood in the doorway and watched the gray sedan reach the end of County Route 12 and turned toward Birch Street, and then he was looking at the road where a dark blue truck had been idling that morning with its engine patient and its driver smiling. And now there was nothing there but the rain and the street and the ordinary late afternoon of a Kentucky Tuesday. His phone buzzed 3 minutes later. He did not look at it immediately. He stood in the doorway a moment longer and let the mist settle on his shoulders and the quiet settle around him. Then he went inside and took the phone from his pocket. One message from a Tennessee number, a single image, a red heart. 3 weeks of silence on his end and 3 minutes on hers, and what she sent back was not a question and not an opening bid in a long and complicated conversation, and not a reproach dressed up as something warmer. It was the one thing a person sent when they had been waiting a long time to hear something specific and had finally heard it and wanted to say so without making it into more than what it was, because what it was already enough. Garrett stood in his garage with the phone in his hand and the red heart on the screen and the notepad in the inside pocket of his vest, and he held all three of those things at once for a long moment. Around him, his men moved through the ordinary business of closing out the afternoon, checking the bikes, updating the organizer, putting the shop back in the shape it was supposed to be in. The radio came back on low and unhurried. The coffee machine produced its familiar sounds. Outside, the mist was thinning and the last gray light of October was coming through the bay door and laying itself across the clean floor in long, pale rectangles. The work was there. The work was always there, and he was glad of it. In the weeks that followed, Officer Kellum filed the case through the department with what her supervisor would later describe in the careful language of official documentation as unusually complete and well-organized supporting evidence. The garage camera footage with its precise timestamps. The diner camera footage from Mrs. Faye Tatum, which showed Victor Shelby's truck in position before the school had sent any notification to any parent. The audio recordings on Donna's phone, transferred properly to evidence in which Victor Shelby named Lily's school and stated her typical dismissal time to a woman who had never provided him with either piece of information. The notebook Donna had been keeping since July, filled with dates and times and specific observed details, each entry brief and factual, and dated in the way of someone who had understood from early on that what she wrote might matter later. The prior record from Ohio, the dispatcher log from Wade's call, the formal statements from Garrett, Wade, Ray, and Earl, each one clear and specific and limited to what each man had actually observed. All of it assembled into a record that told the same story from multiple independent angles, so completely and so precisely sequenced that anyone who looked at it could see exactly what Victor Shelby had done that afternoon and in the months before it. Donna took 2 weeks of leave from the laundromat, and her supervisor held her position and adjusted her schedule when she came back without being asked to do either. The school reached out to Garrett through the principal first in a formal call that became less formal as it progressed, then in a follow-up conversation a few days later that was entirely different in character. The kind of conversation that happened between people who were trying to figure out how to prevent the same shape of thing from happening again. Officer Kellum came back to the shop 3 days after the incident, sat in the office with a cup of coffee that was noticeably better than the gas station variety, and spent an hour with Garrett talking about what the town could do differently. Not theoretically, specifically. What was available, what was achievable, what the realistic first steps looked like. 6 weeks after Lily Hartwell ran across a wet gravel parking lot with a pink backpack and her hands shaking, Harlow, Kentucky had 6 official safe stop locations. Each one had a small, bright decal in the front window and a commitment from the business owner to the community it served. A phone inside that could reach emergency services. An adult inside who had agreed to be present and available. The pharmacy on Maple Avenue. The public library on Courthouse Square. The fire station on 4th Street. The grocery store on the east side of town. Mrs. Faye Tatum's diner, which had already demonstrated its usefulness. And Mercer's Auto and Salvage on County Road 12, where the decal went in the lower right corner of the front window on a Tuesday morning before the shop opened, pressed in with the edge of a credit card to work out the air bubbles the way the instructions specified. Garrett stepped back and looked at it and drank his coffee. 2 weeks after the decals went up, the school gymnasium filled with folding chairs and the particular atmosphere of a community meeting that people had come to because something had actually happened, and they understood it was their business to be there. Parents in work clothes, teachers with the looks of people who had been thinking about this for longer than the event that had prompted the meeting. Students sitting cross-legged on the polished floor in the way that students sat when they had been told there was no assigned seating and they had decided to demonstrate their flexibility. The coach's banners hung from the ceiling above it all, indifferent. Garrett stood near the basketball hoop in a clean shirt under his worn vest, feeling more exposed than he had felt on any highway in 30 years of riding, because highways were familiar and this was not. Beside him stood Officer Kellum and Donna Hartwell and Mrs. Faye Tatum and 3 of the riders who had been in the shop that afternoon and had agreed to come without much persuasion. Donna spoke first. She talked about the password, about how she had made it with Lily not as a game, but as a preparation because she had understood from the 3rd or 4th time Victor appeared at the laundromat that a situation was developing and that the official response available to her was limited in ways she could not fully control. She talked about what it had felt like to report something twice and be told both times that it was not yet enough. She talked about the notebooks she had kept and the recordings she had made and the specific knowledge that preparation, even when it felt inadequate, was better than the alternative of having done nothing. She talked about believing her daughter. She said that Lily had told her over a year before any of this happened that Victor made her feel uncomfortable when he came into the laundromat. She had believed that. She had taken it seriously. She had built the password partly because of it. Officer Kellum talked about safe places and trusted adults, about how children made the best decisions available to them when something was wrong, and about what it meant for a community to have clearly marked locations where those decisions could lead. She talked about the password idea specifically in the terms of someone who intended to repeat it in every similar conversation she had for the foreseeable future. She said that the quality that made Lily's response to that afternoon so effective was not courage in the dramatic sense, but the specific practiced courage of a child who had been given tools and had trusted them under pressure. Garrett had not written anything down. He had not prepared remarks because he had not known in the week before the meeting what the right remarks were, and he had decided that showing up without the right words was preferable to not showing up at all. When the principal introduced him and he walked to the microphone, he stood there for a moment and looked at the room. He saw Lily in the front row beside Donna, her dark green backpack on her lap, both straps unbuckled, looking at him with the attentive, assessing expression he had come to recognize as her default approach to the world. "Most of my life," he said, his voice rough against the gymnasium microphone. "People saw the jacket before they saw the man inside it. Sometimes that was fair and sometimes it wasn't, and I've spent a long time figuring out which was which on any given day." He paused. "What I learned on a Tuesday in October is that none of that matters much when a child is scared. A child in that situation doesn't need someone impressive. She needs someone present. Someone who will stop what they're doing and pay attention before they need to be convinced." He stopped there. The room was quiet. "The thing I want to say, because I didn't say it to the right person at the right time 22 years ago, and I've carried that ever since, when someone tells you they're frightened, that is the information. You don't need additional evidence before you take it seriously. The fear is the evidence, especially when the person telling you is someone who has not given you any reason to doubt them." He looked at Lily. You told the truth under pressure from someone who was actively working to confuse you, he said. And you found the right door. Don't ever let anyone tell you that wasn't enough. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Then it didn't. Lily looked at him from the front row, and what was on her face was not the expression of a child who had been rescued. It was the expression of a child who had been believed, which was a different thing entirely, and which meant something different to carry forward. In the months that followed, Harlow changed in the small ways that towns changed when a specific thing had happened, and the people in them had decided to take it seriously. The safe stop decals became a familiar part of the visual landscape along the main streets. Parents began having the password conversation with their children, some of them calling the school to ask how to approach it, some of them finding their own ways in. Officer Kellum gave a version of the same talk at two other schools in the county, and the version she gave got more specific each time because she had listened carefully to what Lily said in the garage office and understood that precision was more useful than generality. Victor Shelby's case moved through the proper channels at the pace such things moved, which was not fast and was not always satisfying, but which moved in the direction of accountability, and Donna's careful months of documentation made that movement more certain than it would otherwise have been. Garrett drove the charity run south the following weekend with the rest of the chapter and raised more money than the previous year, which he attributed to the weather having finally improved and which Wade attributed to something else that neither of them said out loud, because neither of them was the kind of man who said such things directly. On the first clear Saturday after spring came to Harlow, Garrett was in the lot, rolling a finished motorcycle into the morning sun, checking the paint in the good light, when he heard footsteps on the sidewalk along Route 12. He looked up. Don and Lily came walking along the sidewalk with the easy pace of people with somewhere they were going and no particular urgency about getting there. Lily had her dark green backpack on both straps properly fastened, and she was mid-sentence about something that had her complete attention, her hands describing some shape in the air in front of her as she walked. She stopped when she saw the garage. She looked at the window, at the small, bright decal in the lower right corner, at the particular way the morning light caught the edge of it. Her face did something that Garrett could see clearly from across the lot, something that was not quite any of the things he would have found words for, not pride, not relief, not simple recognition, but the specific expression of someone who sees themselves reflected in something that has outlasted the moment that made it necessary and understands what that means. She raised her hand, the same gesture as October, the same small pale hand against the light, but entirely different in the ease of it. The ease of someone who knew where they were standing and trusted where the gesture was going. Garrett raised his in return. Donna raised hers too, with the particular quality of a woman who had been right about something for a long time and was no longer required to prove it, and who was learning one ordinary morning at a time what it felt like to simply be right without the weight of it. They kept walking. Lily went back to whatever she had been saying, her voice carrying for a moment down the sidewalk, before the distance softened it into something he couldn't quite make out. Garrett stood in the morning sun beside the finished motorcycle and held what the day had given him, which was nothing that would make any record anywhere, nothing requiring ceremony or announcement. Just a child walking past a building with a decal in the window, free enough from what had happened in October to be entirely occupied with something else moving forward in the direction of whatever came next. He went back inside. On the front window, the safe stop decal caught the light and held it small and bright and steady, the way true things were when they had been put in the right place and left there.